Forestry is a big contributing factor to Virginia's economy. Today we're in Floyd, Virginia, visiting Ridgewind Farm, where they do logging and farming a little differently than others. I'm joined by Jason Rutledge, the owner of Ridgewind Farm. Jason, thanks so much for having us out today.
Glad to be here. Glad you're here.
So, tell us how you do things differently. What sets you apart from other loggers and farmers?
Well, I think the horses and draft animal power is a central component in our work that doesn't completely replace tractors or machinery, but it is used where we find the horses to be a superior technique. We do single tree selection and pull out one log at a time. And of course, our farming, we use the horses for mowing, for raking, for baling, for plowing, and disking, ordering land up, and cultivating land. So we use our horses in all of our farming and forestry activities as appropriate.
So let's talk a little bit about your horses. How many do you have, and are you breed specific?
Yes, we have 14 Suffolk Punch horses, which is a horse that originated in England from the county of Suffolk, which was the breadbasket of England. It was the plains. They're the oldest draft breed as far as documented registry from back in the 1500s. They are not a flashy horse. They're a plain horse. They've been bred exclusively for working. We keep a stallion and several mares and keep two teams that are always here for us to work in the woods and on our forests, and in our forest and in the community, in the forest of the community. So we have Suffolk Punch draft horses. We keep 14 at the moment.
So you have 14 draft horses. What about manpower? Is this a family-run business? How many people do you have working here?
Well, it is a family-run business, and everybody that farms and has a family knows that doesn't always make it easier. My son and my daughter work with me both part-time because they both have other jobs, and as I mentioned earlier, my daughter's going to nursing school. And I always have apprentices. I have people that want to learn this skill set that come here and pay for their education with sweat equity. They actually work and learn the skills of how to do this work. It is very dangerous work. 15 people a year die in Virginia in logging, most of the time in the timber felling, the hand felling portion of it. So we do a lot to promote a method of logging developed, a method of timber felling developed by a Swedish man named Soren Eriksson. I actually studied with Soren Eriksson over 25 years ago when the Virginia Department of Forestry sent him throughout rural Virginia teaching chainsaw safety and skills. So I have used my position to teach people how to fell trees safely. There is a technique, there is a method. It's now the method that's also adopted, promoted, and taught by the Virginia Department of Forestry. So it's very important that whoever is helping us knows how to operate safely.
I want to talk a little bit about your forestry side of your farm. You have a company called Draftwood Forest Products. Tell us a little bit about that, how it came about, and when.
Draftwood Forest Products is an attempt to establish a source differentiated identity for our product. It's like organic. You know, when you buy something organic, you know that the source of the food is different. And draftwood is horse log lumber from restorative forestry. So it establishes a source differentiated identity that allows the consumer to support good environmental work with their purchasing decision on which forest products to buy. And we produce all products that are made out of the species native to the Appalachian forest type. We sell a lot of white pine into the log cabin markets. We sell a lot of our oak into hardwood flooring processing. And we sell all species that are available to harvest on the restorative forestry basis that we use. And that includes Worst First. Draftwood is a brand name. It was started in 1998 as a way of letting the customer support the kind of work that we're doing in the forest for all the benefits that it has, and for them to feel like they're a part of doing something differently by I call it ecological capitalism. It's letting the people spend their money to support the kind of work that they want to see going on in their community.
And that kind of work is very environmentally friendly. Why do you choose to use the draft horses as opposed to some of the lumbering equipment? It's got to be harder work.
It is definitely labor intensive. That's the only real drawback, is that it takes longer and it takes more human participation. But we choose the horses because they are the ultimate low impact overland extraction technique. They actually can move heavy objects from the stump where the tree is felled to the landing with less environmental impact on the forest soils and on the residual trees. When you're practicing restorative forestry, where you take the worst trees first, then you also embrace the concept of what you leave is more important than what you take. So the horses provide us a method of removing heavy logs, but not damaging the residual trees that we will hope to come back and harvest again in the future.
I want you to explain to me a little bit about restorative forestry and the worst first. How do you do that? When you set off on your logging day, how does it go? What's your process?
Well, I think the best way to start that is the differentiation that I make between sustainable and restorative. We know that the quality of the forest products that are being produced in Virginia today are lowering in quality as far as the yield from individual logs. We're not getting as much clear lumber out of the logs we're cutting today as we did 40 years ago. So in that understanding, we know that the quality of the material is in a decline. And I don't understand how we can sustain a decline. If the forest products are declining in quality and grade, then it seems to me that we have to do things to improve the forest in order to have a chance to sustain it. So that's why I use the term restorative. I believe that in order for your forestry to be truly sustainable, it must be restorative. And I would like to move the debate away from what is sustainable to what is restorative. And restorative to me means making the forest as much like a native forest as possible in a single entry or a single intervention for harvesting. And following the principles of imitating nature by taking the worst trees first, we leave the best trees, which then began to grow much quicker, as much as 300% growth rate increase from what's called crop tree management, where we actually leave trees that are in the best growing condition, in the best specimens, and on the best site. And once the forest is thinned back, those trees then begin to grow much faster. So those are the trees that we will harvest in the future. And we try to follow the principle of we will harvest no tree before its time. And every tree does have a time, and we do need to harvest trees. So that's what we do. We just harvest the trees that are truly ripe for harvesting. We actually have developed a method called Nature's Tree Marking Paint Indicators, which is 18 signs of visible low productivity in 3 categories of damaged, diseased, and inferior. And when 3 strikes occur on a single individual out of those 18 indicators, then that tree is deemed ripe for harvest. All of this information is available on our website at healingharvestforestfoundation.org.
So you talk about taking the worst trees first, but that doesn't mean that your lumber is inferior by any means. Tell me a little bit about your products that you use your lumber for and what your customers have to say about it.
Well, worst first doesn't mean that the tree is rotten or totally decayed. It just means that it's not highly productive in its current condition. So when we process the logs from those worst first individually selected trees, they always yield some good lumber. The key there is that we also work on good sites, meaning sites that have an average age range of over 75 years for the trees, that have a good inventory, a high stocking rate. The trees are often too overcrowded, so we're actually doing a lot of thinning of forest, and it follows right into the technique that's called crop tree management.
Well, talking about restorative forestry, I know that you plant your seedlings, but you plant them a little differently than some other foresters may. Tell us about that.
Well, we don't plant trees. And the reason we don't plant trees is because we depend upon natural regeneration. And when you leave the forest in a condition of the best specimens being the dominant trees, then they become a seed source for the future forest. So we don't have to plant any trees. We just remove the forest, remove the trees that need to come out, create enough disturbance and allow enough light to come into the forest that we then get vigorous regeneration.
Well, you talk about using the draft horses, and I think, in my mind, that gives you access to some forest land that you probably can't get machinery up into. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, and you are exactly right. And here are the demographics that support that. The Virginia Forest Landowners Association has conducted surveys of land ownership conditions in the past 30 years that have proven that land ownership, forest land ownership, is becoming a matter of smaller and smaller tracts of land. In '99, it was 70% of the land was in 40 acres or less. In 2009, it had gone up to where 70% of the land owned in Virginia was in tracts of 10 acres or less. So the smaller the ownership of the land is, the less likely it is to suit conventional harvesting, which means mechanization and generally clear cutting. These small landowners will not allow anybody to cut all the trees around their home that they've built out in the countryside, but they know that trees do need to be harvested because they see natural mortality occurring and trees dying all the time. So what was once a niche of horse logging is now becoming the technique that actually addresses the largest landscape condition in all of Virginia, which is the 70% of the land that's in private ownership in 10 acres or less. So we actually are able to serve those small tracts very efficiently in that we don't have to build roads. We can move around in our community with just our horses and our log carts and our loaders and trucks. And we can meet the landowner's objectives, which are the aesthetics, the natural beauty of the forest. We actually go in and harvest trees, and they can hardly tell that we're there, and it's a have your cake and eat it too. They get a little money for the trees that we take out, and they still have their forest.
So give me some numbers on your forestry production.
On an average, we'll harvest 1,500 to 2,000 board feet a day, which is roughly 5 to 7 trees, or about 25 logs. And when we work a 5-day week, that'll put us up there around 6,000 or 7,000 board feet a week. That is low production. Most mechanized guys will harvest 20,000 board feet a day. But our position is that since it takes a lifetime to grow those trees, we're not really in any hurry to cut them all down at one time.
Now, you don't use your draft horses just for logging. You use them for row crops and other agricultural purposes here on the farm, don't you?
Yes, I do. We mow our hay, we rake our hay, we ted our hay. We have a modern ground-driven PTO cart manufactured by the Amish in Pennsylvania that we use to run Category 1 modern farm implements. We plow, disc, harrow, plant, cultivate our row crops, our corn, and in particular I have some open pollinated, organically grown non-GMO corn that's had a pretty good year here in 2014, and I'd like to show you some of that.
Let's go take a look. I'm dying to see that.
All right.
So here we are at your cornfield, and this is some nice looking corn. Now, everything you do here is organic, correct?
Yes, it is. It's not certified organic because I don't want to bother with the cost of that, but it's grown without chemical fertilizer, herbicides, or pesticides. And all the fertility that's in this ground is the result of good sound farming practices like crop rotation. This is the second year that this ground has been in open tillage from old sod. And we just accept that there's going to be a certain amount of insect damage, and we just take what's left. And of course, we're also dealing with predation by wildlife in the form of bear and deer. But this is my open pollinated corn. It's a 87-day corn that's been developed to be quick season because we do live on the mountain, and to be short in height because we get a lot of wind up here at Ridge Wind Farm. So the idea is to have a corn that matures quick enough to dry down, even though it's planted in late May, and to stand the hard winds of the occasional thunderstorms and hurricanes we may get here. So this is non-GMO organically grown or naturally grown, or however you want to say it, open pollinated corn. You can actually keep these corn seed and select the ones that have the characteristics that you want and plant them back forever.
All of this corn is planted using your draft horses. What's the benefit of using your horses as opposed to today's modern machinery?
That's a great question, and it has a lot of answers. The first one is independence. I'm able to work these horses on farm-grown fuel, essentially solar energy in the form of hay that I mow and grain that I grow, so I don't have to have fossil fuel from an outside source that I don't control the price of. So it gives me an element of independence. But the other reasons is it allows me to work the ground during a wider period of moisture contents. It doesn't compact the ground as much. So I just feel that for the amount of input, especially out-of-pocket cost, I can produce more food with less money. It does take more energy. It is labor intensive. It takes skill and timing to understand the art of farming, which is a lot of what farming is. Instead of depending on chemicals to do things, I have to actually use good sound farming practices, crop rotation, conservation tillage, and timely cultivation. And that's how I produce this crop of corn.
It's not easy, but it's worth it.
It is worth it. It's like we were speaking of earlier there. This is a source of dignity for me. This is a source of feeling good about what I'm doing with my life. And nobody has the ability to put a price on my dignity besides myself. And I think that it's priceless.
I happen to agree.
Thank you for coming.
Now, if people would like some more information on your farm, where should they go?
We have a website for the farm under ridgewindsuffolks.com, www.ridgewindsuffolks.com.
Okay.
You can find out about our horses and our farming activities there. And I also have a Facebook presence that you can find under my name, Jason Rutledge.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having us out today. It's been an amazing journey.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm glad it didn't rain on us.
Me too. We'll be right back.